volunteering can be one of the best or the worst parts of a church experience. On its own, volunteering is a really good thing. It's good for the church, it's good for the community, and it's good for your soul. But sadly, when volunteering cultures go wrong, it can be incredibly damaging. And in this episode of the Church Disrupted podcast, that's exactly what we're talking about. Today, we're joined by fellow podcaster Nick Flores from the Collision podcast, and we're talking about everything volunteer exploitation. What are the damaging effects of volunteering going wrong, and how can churches better protect their volunteers? If you're in a church and you're volunteering, how can you set up boundaries to protect yourself and make sure that you are serving people well while also staying healthy? We talk about all of those things and more on this episode of the podcast, and it is a fantastic conversation. So if you have ever volunteered in a church, or you are currently volunteering in a church, or you're on staff at a church that needs and uses volunteers, you are not going to want to miss this conversation. So if you're ready, let's jump in together. Let's dive into this conversation on this episode of the Church Disrupted podcast. All right, guys, welcome back to the Church Disrupted podcast with your host, Jeff Cochran. I'm here today with our guest, Nick Flores. Nick is actually the host of the Collision podcast. You're going to hear more from him in just a moment as he explains kind of what he does. But Nick, I also love conversations like this because you're a part of our community. You know, you kind of watch what's going on online. You reached out with an Instagram message and said, hey, I've got a topic I'd like to talk about. Would it be okay if I jumped on the podcast? And you're the second kind of listener now who has met us on social media that said, hey, I've got a topic, and we talked about it. So if you're listening and you have a topic, you have something you'd like to talk about, reach out. We can't promise that it'll be on the podcast, but we would love to hear from you. And you never know, it might be a great episode. But today, we're going to talk about volunteer exploitation. We're going to talk about how churches can use and sometimes abuse volunteers in ways that turn people away from the churches on the unhealthy side. But we're also going to talk about some things that churches can do on the healthy side to protect people and to keep people engaged in a way that's healthy for them and the church. Because this is something that Nick, we talked about this a lot in different places on the podcast. It's something that's near and dear to my heart as well. But without further ado, let me introduce to you Nick Flores. And Nick, why don't you tell the Church Disrupted audience just a little bit about yourself and about your podcast?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff, for having me on. And super, shout out, congrats for having people reach out and then being willing to engage in these conversations with your audience. I've definitely listened to a few of your episodes and have really been engaged. That's what got me to reach out. So I'm a host of Collision Podcast. It's a podcast about deconstruction and folks meeting people on their journeys or wherever they are on the spectrum of deconstruction. Maybe they're people that have just been totally hurt and abused by the church in various forms. And so they're like, church isn't for me, and this is why I'm going to leave. Or it's someone that's just been rocking church their entire life. They've had some ebbs and flows, ups and downs, as we all do. But they still kind of go to church, and they're still like, I still believe in God. I still believe in Christianity. I still want to see the church ultimately do better. And I feel like that's what this conversation will be about is not necessarily, hey, the church is terrible on XYZ reasons, but it's more of like the church has failed in certain capacities, but I believe that it can do better. And so rather than me wanting to leave, at least for myself, like I don't want to fully leave Christianity. There's still part of it. There's so much beauty within the church that the church can do, but there's a lot of places it fails. And so I want to be a part of the conversation where it's like, hey, how can we do better? How can we can listen to people? That's what my podcast is about, is meeting people that have been hurt and hearing their stories and saying, hey, you've been hurt in this capacity. To me as a Christian, how do I look at your story and say, how have I contributed to your hurt? How have I been a part of systems that ultimately have hurt you? or it's the opposite. It's listening to people that have been hurt and saying, whoa, that has happened to me. I did not realize that was bad. I did not realize that was abuse. I did not realize that was manipulation. So Collision is a mirror of a podcast. It's a place for you to go to ask yourself these questions. It's not a place for you to go find the answers, but it's a spot for just meeting people where they are, as I see, as Jesus has done throughout the entirety of the gospel, is just meeting people where they are and listening to their stories. And so that's what Collision is.
Yeah, well, I love that. I love that description, that Collision is a mirror. They're just holding up a mirror as people tell their stories. Sometimes you're going to see your story in it. Sometimes you won't. Another thing that I love, Nick, is I love having these conversations because we talked about it a little bit. I had a couple of episodes where we talked about, deconstruction with people.
Yeah.
Deconstruction means a lot of things. Too often we think deconstruction means leaving the faith as a whole. And sometimes it does. But more people than not that I meet who are deconstructing, they're deconstructing not even so much their faith, they're deconstructing a lot of tradition. They're deconstructing what they were told their faith was. And a lot of people who would say, hey, I've deconstructed or I am deconstructing still love Jesus or still involved in the church, but they know something has to change, right? And the church has always needed reform. Like the body of Christ is beautiful when we look and love like Jesus, right? But the institution of the church, it needs reform like any other institution, and we're kind of due for a reform. It's been a really long time, since we've had a reformation. And so these conversations, I love them because we're not just going to point out, hey, this is a place where the church is sometimes hurting people on purpose, but a lot of times it's inadvertent, it's unintentional. But here, what can we learn from it to get better? So I've seen volunteer exploitation kind of from the opposite side. It was one of those things that I woke up to it toward the end of my ministry career because I was in ministry, as a local church pastor for 2 decades, and I realized, got these teams of hundreds, but we're asking the same people to do the same things all the time. They're serving in multiple other ministries. They may be here for 12 hours on a Sunday. This doesn't feel right. It feels like we're doing more harm than good, as some of these families are being torn apart and stuff like that because they're always at the church. They're never together. Other different things happen and people burning out, leaving the church, and then you don't know where they went at all. So it's near and dear to my heart, but kind of from the other side, you've experienced this as someone who really early on got very involved in the church and started volunteering. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your story and how your story intersected with realizing that volunteer exploitation is a big issue. Because someone with a story like yours, you don't get to volunteer exploitation if you don't love your church and love volunteering and love using your gifts. So there's kind of two sides to that coin. So tell me about your history, kind of how you got involved in the church and when you realized that, hey, maybe the way we're treating volunteers is hurtful.
Yeah. I began serving from a really young age in junior high and middle school. So 6th grade, I don't know how old, I think I'm 12 years old at that point. And I really began jumping into service at church as a way to pay off summer camp because my family didn't make a lot of money, but there was a camp every summer and even winter time, there's a winter camp. And so in order to quote, like earn a scholarship, you had to work it off. So we got to work off half of camp and then my parents would pay the other half out of their pocket. And when you broke it down, it was $5 an hour, and you're working off about $120. So do the math on that. And so, so I got started there. It was real simple. It was just like, hey, I really want to go to camp, but I'm going to start serving, and I have to work it off. So I'm cleaning the bathrooms, cleaning under the pews, vacuuming, cleaning the windows, etc. Anything you possibly could do around a church campus, I was doing. And so, but I think there and within that context, I felt like, okay, this makes sense because it's an exchange for going to camp. But I think that was a gateway for a lot of people, a lot of my friends, myself included, where it's just like, okay, now I'm in church, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. But as I got further involved, it then morphed from just doing janitorial duties to then getting into graphic design and working on pamphlets and marketing materials and cutting things and all that nature. And that more from now I'm not just working off camp, but now once camp is over, now I'm in this program, I'm in this routine of like making a flyer, making a calendar, making a pamphlet. And that's just never ending. Especially back then before the internet was even a thing. It was just everything was printed. So there's so much print material to be made every weekend and week out. And then as I continued to get involved on the graphic design side, I then got involved in the audio ministry and doing audio. And then that means, hey, you're coming to church early because you got to set up the stage. And then you're staying for the multiple services. At our church, we do 3 services on the Sunday morning. And so you're there early and then you're there late. And as you said, people constantly they find themselves in that cycle of I'm here every freaking service midweek as well. And I've talked to a lot of friends now that led worship too. And it's just even harder for them because they're then practicing, having to learn new songs at home, in a constant fear of, it not being right, being out of tune. Maybe you forget the lyric or whatever. So then there's also that added like social pressure as well to continue to perform. But for my story, getting into design stuff, it was more, especially within the church context of everything needing to look kind of perfect, as best as you possibly can. At a young age, for me, that wasn't communicated as to why. It was mainly just it has to look better. You have to use the right fonts. It has to be the right colors, et cetera, et cetera. And so I know for me, that put a lot of mental strain on myself of like continuously trying to like get the approval of a pastor saying, okay, yes, that looks good. Okay, yes, that looks good. But now looking back as an adult, I'm like, wait, that was like free. That's free work. That's a volunteer. Someone's just like, I have some extra time and giving it to you. And you're saying, oh, it's not good enough.
Right? Constant critique on free work that you're not getting paid for.
Constant critique. And that just led me down, looking back, it just led me down a spiral of like not feeling like I was ever worth it, that my value was in what I produced, and in return also reflected on my faith as well, of like, hey, like I have to do all these things to earn the love of God. I have to do all these things to earn the love of my peers and the pastors and the church and just status, because these people, they're only going to love me if I perform at such a high level. And so, that's definitely the start of my journey. And then that continued throughout middle school, like I said, high school, even in the young adulthood, where every ministry I was ever involved in, whether attending or just serving, had to be at 100%, 1,000%, always needing to be on, being able to have answers, being able to know everything that's going on in it through ins and outs of a ministry.
And that's a lot of pressure, like not just the pressure of, hey, I need to have really good graphic design, but it's the pressure of I need to know the ins and the outs of this ministry and be able to answer all these questions as a volunteer. That's a ton of pressure, because I know, the pressure that I would carry as a pastor, with those things. And there's always more work to be done in the church. There's always more that could be done. So it's easy to pull from volunteers, especially when they're enjoying it. But one of the things you said that really, man, it just kind of broke my heart, because I'm thinking, how many times have I done this on accident, when I was a pastor? And again, this is why we're not just throwing stones or saying, hey, let's learn together, because I've done some of these things. You got someone who's willing, they're working, they're volunteering, they're doing a good job. How many times did I say something that got into their identity to make them feel like, hey, I'm not good enough, or I have to perform? It's one of the things you said that really broke my heart was, I felt like I always had to be on, I always had to perform for God to love me. When, we're recording this on Holy Week, right? We're recording this week of Easter. It's probably going to come out for a little while, but I'm just thinking the message of the gospel is we can't perform good enough. The message of the gospel is that Jesus took our place so that we didn't have to work for salvation. We didn't have to work for a relationship with him. So, man, I just hate that so young that connected to your identity and it became a part of, your faith journey. When you were at the height of your volunteering, right?
Mhm.
How many hours a week would you work on like the heaviest week?
Oh man, probably like 20 to 30 hours. And that's it. I'm a youth. And so I've recently started to think about that as I continue to talk to other people with their experiences as well. I was like, my first job in high school, I wasn't even working that much because
Mm-hmm.
California labor laws, I grew up in California. And so, yeah, even as an employee, I couldn't work that much. And I wasn't, yeah. So it's like basically I was volunteering as much as I was in school, in high school. And so, yeah,
Mm.
just continue. And then just always wanting to think about it. Um, but I think for me, where I want to come at this topic is, um, yeah, like you said, I did enjoy it. I did enjoy doing graphic design. Ultimately, that's what I do now professionally, and so that's where I got my start is at church. I tell a lot of young designers or young people that want to get into kind of anything that if you can volunteer, like and get your experience there, um, generally it's well accepted. um,
Yeah.
Free work is well accepted, and but yeah, not everything I did at church in terms of design work was always critiqued, but it just felt like there was this undercurrent, like this tone. I
Mm-hmm.
will have been explicitly told multiple times, "Hey, that doesn't look good. Hey, you need to go back to the drawing board, do it again," or "Hey,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't fit our standards. We're not going to use it." Um, I've had that happen to me, but I know
Yeah.
that wasn't always the case. But for me, I used church volunteer as a way to be safe. It was a safe
Mm.
environment for me to be in. I was at
Yeah.
home. It was an abusive situation at home for myself. And so being at church and being around all these people all that I knew, my peers, it just felt better. So it was like picking the lesser of two evils, per
Yeah.
se. So I was like, okay, well, I'll go to church and I'll endure, this identity crisis there because at least to me, the abuse didn't feel as heavy as what I would be enduring at home. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think for me, when I got out of high school and I graduated and I began as a volunteer within youth ministry, with working with with high school students and getting them involved in sound ministry and getting them involved in doing graphics and stuff. It was
Mm-hmm.
never. I knew I didn't want to say, hey, this doesn't look good. I didn't want to because I knew what that felt like.
Yeah.
But then I also made it a point to ask people like, how are you doing? How are you doing with this? Like,
That's
why are you
huge.
doing this? And I think that I was never asked that. Never was given that opportunity to say, hey, I really feel safe here. And so that's why I continue to pour myself out. Maybe that could have led to conversations of why do you feel safe here? Um, and I've had conversations with my old youth pastors now as an adult, and so it's like, yeah, I've never, as a kid, I didn't know how to speak up about abusive things that were happening at home.
Yeah.
I didn't have the words. Didn't. No one knew how to do that. Um, and my pastors were like 20, right? So they just like
Yeah.
graduated college, and so I'm like, looking back now as an adult, I don't put that on them of like, hey, why didn't you know I was being abused at home? Why didn't you ask me anything? But now it's like I can have these conversations as an adult with words and say, hey, this is
Yeah.
my experience. Here's how we can do better. Maybe we should check in on our students and say, hey, why are you doing this? Or let them know that you don't need to do this.
Yeah.
We would love for you to just be here and like hang out.
Yeah.
You don't need to serve all the time and
Yeah.
continuously be on. So yeah.
Spiritual abuse is terrible because it causes trauma that can linger for a lifetime. And the pain that comes with spiritual abuse, that's the kind of pain that a person can feel deep into their soul. At the Spiritual Abuse Institute, We want to stop spiritual abuse through awareness, education, research, and practical resources. You see, at SAI, we're fighting for a future where spiritual abuse is rare and really hard to hide. But we can't do this without your help. As a donor-funded nonprofit organization, we rely on the support of our community for everything that we do. So, if you've been blessed or encouraged by this podcast in any way, would you consider giving a donation of any kind? Because by partnering with SAI financially, you are giving a voice to the voiceless. You're going to help more people heal from the devastating effects of spiritual abuse, and you're going to help us to challenge more churches to create safe and healthy environments for everyone. You can give a donation by clicking on the link in the description below or by visiting spiritualabuse.institute. Every gift counts, and we are hyper grateful for every donor and every supporter of this community. And hey, in May and June, we're looking specifically for 100 people who would commit to giving $1 a day to support SAI. By giving as little as $1 a day, you'll help us reach our budget for the rest of the year, and you're going to help us to get more content out, to help more people heal, and to do work with more churches who want to start doing things the right way. So if you've been impacted in any way by this content or the Church Disrupted podcast, would you consider joining the 100 for 1 campaign and becoming a financial supporter of SAI? Thank you so much for your consideration. And guys, thank you. Thank you to every single person who has already partnered with us financially. Together, we can end spiritual abuse and we can help the church become a place of hope and healing for everyone again. Well, I think that's huge, man. And again, you know, I see mistakes that I've made just in this conversation because I was a long time student pastor. And a lot of times, you know, our pastors, especially when we're talking about student pastors, they're in over their head too, right? This is new. They're young. There's not a manual for it. The best thing we can do though is always be learning, right? Definitely. You know, so I look back and I made a lot of those mistakes too, but something as simple as asking a question of, hey, Nick, we love that you're here. Man, you're here a lot and we love it. It helps us so much. It's a blast when you're here. We love you being around, but just want to check in. How's graphic design doing? How's home doing? What is it that you love about being here? Those questions seem innocuous. They seem useless, but it shows, it really is powerful because it shows that they care about you. You know, and two, it gives you an opportunity to tell them about other things going on in your life. For you, it could have been the abuse you were suffering at home where someone could have gotten you help. But for others, it could be about their hopes and it could be about their dreams. It could be about the anxiety they're experiencing, you know? It could be, you know, it could have been a conversation with you, Nick, of saying, hey, one of the reasons I love to be here outside of it being a safe place is, you know, I really like this graphic design stuff. Oh, is that something you think you may want to do as a career someday? Right. You know, that conversation. So there is such a power. I think you hit the nail on the head. There's just, there is more power than we realize in those conversations. And when people are volunteering, if they're also being ministered to and cared for and known and loved and valued, I think they're willing to give more, and it doesn't feel abusive. You know, so I'm not saying to do that as a tool of exploitation, but it helps people when they are giving more. But I also think about just boundaries, man. I think boundaries could be so helpful because one of the things, you know, that you said that it just keeps sticking out to me, 20 to 30 hours a week, you know, probably 25, 30 hours on average a week as a student. At 32 hours a week, they would need to pay you like full-time insurance. You'd be considered a full-time employee. You said California labor laws wouldn't let you work that much at your job. So what can churches learn about boundaries and putting up proactive boundaries that just because a person's willing to volunteer that much time, one, it doesn't mean they should. And two, if they are willing to volunteer that much time, there might be something else going on in their life that's causing that. So what would you recommend looking back on it now, as far as how pastors and church staff can put up healthy boundaries to protect people and to find out what's pushing them to be at the church that often?
Yeah, I think slowing down is key. Is there's It's always about the next week. It's always about the next camp. So the next retreat, the next mission trip. What is
Sunday's
coming up?
always coming.
Yep, Sunday is always coming, and then there's a midweek, and then there's a youth group on Friday. There's always just something going on, and it's just always about raking in people. But I think looking back on my experiences, slowing down definitely would have helped in terms of that, and then also just like being more inclusive with people. Um, there was definitely and it's within a lot of churches you find there's a volunteer team, there's a worship team, and they're a part of the in crowd. There's this cool kids club that you have to be a part of within this culture, and only when you're within this culture, being cool, maybe your dad's the pastor, or your mom's like a super volunteer with children's ministry, or your family's just rich and they tithe a lot. um, and so you're part of the in crowd, so you're able to volunteer, you're able to be on stage, you're able to have your hands in event coordinating. And I look back and I'm just like, man, there are a lot of kids that I grew up with that attempted they attempted to volunteer, they attempted to fill in these gaps, but they were just never super like welcomed in the culture. And so I'm
Mm.
like, well, if Timmy was able to like volunteer with Nick, then that would cut Nick's like hours in half. And then if you add another kid, then it divides and divides and divides. And so I think one, slowing down, and then also being aware of other people within your ministry that, it's all about unity at the end of the day, not
Yeah,
uniformity. And so if you get
that's
people
good.
that might not believe, they might not be as like strong of a Christian, they might not be, related to so and so, but it's just another kid from the street that's just like, hey, I want to volunteer. And then again, that opens up the door of, hey, why do you want to volunteer? What is
Mhm.
happening? How can we serve you as a student? How can we serve you as a volunteer? um, and so I think ultimately it's just that, it's just like being
Yeah.
aware, having your eyes open to the people within your building, within your sphere of influence, saying, hey, we're a church, we're supposed to be serving you. We're supposed to be serving the
Hmm.
congregation. We're supposed to be serving the people. We're supposed to be loving you rather than just like putting on the production for the club of people.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah, that's good. That's good stuff. How many areas were you volunteering in? Because you talked about I was doing graphic design, you were
yeah.
doing sound. How at one time, like kind of the max you were doing at one time? What was the max amount of kind of volunteer ministries you were serving in at one time?
In high school, I was doing graphics for the high school ministry, graphics for the junior high ministry. So it's two ministries there. And then I was doing some light like event coordinating in high school. So like planning trips to Six Flags, or to the pizza port down the street, stuff like that. And
Yeah.
then I was doing some campus outreach. So I was also a volunteer at my high school with the Christian club, and so that kind of a little loosely related to where I was at with the church, and so getting
Hmm.
students from campus onto church on Sunday. And then I was also diving into wanting to be a youth pastor, and so
Hmm.
that from there was like, okay, well now we're gonna have Nick learn how to like preach from the pulpit, and so I would share from the stage like twice a quarter. And then, yeah, so I was doing all those things, but a lot of my time was eaten up by the graphic design stuff, because that's just continuously like creating materials, and then also
Yeah.
doing the PowerPoints and making all the PowerPoint slides. And then our church wasn't fortunate enough to have the pro presenter, so we weren't able
Yeah.
to just download the worship slides. I remember having to
Hmm.
type up, getting like the worship set list the night before, and then typing up and like all the new songs that we didn't have
That's a
into
total different
PowerPoint.
ministry in and of itself, right?
Definitely, yes. And then music, audio. So working on doing the stage stuff with the high school ministry as well. So continuously I threw myself into everything I possibly could, because it was a way for me to disassociate from abusive relationship at home. And so, yeah, I was definitely in the
Yeah.
height of doing everything. And that even translated when I went into a young adults ministry as well. Like
Mm,
now I don't have school to be at every day. I don't
yeah.
have, so now I can just be on campus
Mm,
every waking hour I possibly could be, whether that was in the coffee shop or hanging out in a ministry room or in an office. You would
yeah.
find me on campus, just being there, maybe not necessarily always doing something, but always just, I'm around. So if you need help, I'll be there. And then with just so much more freedom, I was then able to like repaint like props, for the ministry, and then do all, like experiment with lighting stuff because I have much more free time than I did in high school.
Hmm.
Experiment with sound stuff and setting up chairs, different configurations. And
Yeah.
so as I got more freedom, then I was like, oh, I can continuously like
Yeah.
pour even more of myself out. But yeah, and then I'm like, okay, well, I'm now serving in each of these services, um, and so I'm continuing to pour out, but nothing like in return was being poured back into me, on the spiritual side. So I definitely lacked there as well.
Yeah. Well, and there's just a couple of things that stick out, you know, to that from me. Like, I mean, I'm counting, and I just saw, wrote it on my notepad. I
Yeah.
counted 7 different ministries that you were regularly serving in at one time as a high school student, right?
Yeah.
And on one hand, it's good. You're getting good things from this. You're learning graphic design and your passion for
Yep.
graphic design. You're getting to hone your skills.
Mhm.
You had a safe place to go, to
Yeah.
escape abuse, to feel like you belong. So there's really good things in that. And I think
Yeah.
about the good things that come from all the internship programs I ran over the years and stuff. So that, especially for kids to have a place to go in the summer.
Yep.
But I also think 7 ministries, like the amount of times your brain is switching, the amount of things you're doing. The average from what I found, because I also have served for a long time as a church consultant.
Mhm.
Been in big ministries as a pastor. The average church is going to have around 3 to 3.5 that people are going to serve. The average volunteer is going to serve in 3 to 3.5 different ministries. That's
Mhm.
one of the reasons why they get burnt out, especially if
Yeah.
you're an adult and you have a full-time job and you have a family. You can't serve in 3 or 3.5 ministries long term and not burn out. Now, you didn't have a family and didn't have a full-time job and all those sort of things, but seven is too much for anybody.
Yeah.
So I just think, and I wonder, you know, when you're a pastor, it's so easy not to notice it because, again,
Mhm.
like you said, Sunday's always coming. There's something, more to do. You can
Yeah.
always use the help. But I wonder how meaningful it would have been for you if you had some pastors and church staff come around you and say, "Hey, man, you're here all the time. You're serving a lot of ministries. Like, we want to protect you. We want to protect your time. We want to
Mhm.
make sure you're okay. Can we cut back on some things?" I wonder if just that conversation, would have been helpful to you. And if it would have, again, uncovered some more of the conversations that you needed to have with someone about non volunteer stuff, just about life stuff. What do you think?
Yeah. Definitely. I definitely think that will help. That would have helped. Yeah, we a couple years ago, me and my wife stopped going to church just for personal reasons, and as we began coming back to church, we about 2 years ago we found a church we really enjoyed, and that was definitely a topic of conversation there from the staff,
Mm,
amongst the congregation, is checking in on the volunteers, and
yeah.
it's like you said, and then redirecting them into resources of mental health resources, therapy, science backed therapy, not just like spiritual direction. Um,
Yeah. Not just biblical
but
counseling with someone who has a
yeah,
certification.
yeah, exactly. And it was really a culture of continuously checking in. How are you doing?
Yeah.
How's life at home? How are things going in general? And why do you want to serve? And then having like classes set up, that you would have to kind of go to before you could even serve, as a way of like, hey, here's kind of what the expectations are. Here are the boundaries. Here's like the boundaries for you as a volunteer, but then the boundaries as like us as a church not wanting to like have you behind the sound booth every week, but we want you to be a part of the community as a whole. We want you to have your own like healthy relationships with people within the congregation, so we all can eventually grow together rather than someone out back just always continuously pouring and pouring and pouring and pouring and pouring out. But we want to pour back into you as our volunteers. And so that to me was just like super eye opening of like, here's
Mm-hmm.
how a church could do it better. Man, I wish that's what it was like for me as a high schooler, as a junior higher, as a young adult. Was I wish people had that intentionality with the volunteers within even the
Yeah.
staff, and pouring back into the community rather than hey, we're just going to look, and it's like you said, none of the volunteering I did was bad. There were a lot of pros that
Mm-hmm.
came out of it, like you said. With all my experience, I was able to bypass college and just get into design
Mm-hmm.
from a freelance perspective and build my own portfolio that way. So there were a lot of pros. I definitely gained a lot of experience. I learned a lot about
Yeah.
people. But as an adult looking back at the situation, I'm like, yeah, that wasn't super healthy. That was like super accelerated, like growth, like a growth track that I didn't need to be on. I
Mm-hmm.
could have spent more time just being a kid, being with friends and being
Mm-hmm.
with family and healthy relationships. I could have been set up to where, like you said, someone could have asked me, "Hey, how are things at home?" To where
Mm-hmm.
I could have felt safe enough and confident enough in my own self worth, rather than my worth being based on my works, right? Being based on here's all the things I'm doing, and being distracted in that manner, but really of like,
Yeah.
hey, we love you for just who you are. And we love you that you're here because this is how Jesus would love. We love you because you're his creation, that you're cherished. But rather than, hey, we're only going to give you the time and space because you've continuously served and you just keep showing up here. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it almost, and it's not being communicated, in words,
Yeah.
but the message that's almost communicated, to someone in your situation is, yes, church can be a safe place. This is a safe place where you can come to escape from all the other stuff going on in the world, to escape from this abusive situation at home. But it's only going to be safe as long as you perform. And you can
Yeah.
only stay as long as you perform. And even though nobody said that out loud, that's kind of the message that attaches to your soul a little bit. So then
Definitely.
you got this anxiety of, if I don't perform well enough, then I won't be welcome into this safe
Mm,
place, right? So,
yeah.
um, and when you think about volunteers, people who are volunteering as much as you were, somebody who's volunteering in, 4, 5, 6, 7 ministries, they're there
Hmm.
20 to 30 hours a week. You're now taking a lot off of those pastors, a lot off of those staff members. Um, I think it would just be helpful, almost for like a staff member, for every 5 hours a person's like spending the volunteering here, they've taken some time off of me. Let's go have an hour at coffee where there's no
Hmm.
agenda, but just I want to hear about your life. Can I pray for you? Can I buy you lunch? Can we just talk? And hey, you can, if you want to stay here and volunteer, maybe, I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna put up some boundaries. I'm gonna say, hey, why don't you go home? Why don't you take a week off? But if you want to stay, you're gonna have to go get another meal with me, or you're gonna have to go get coffee. We're gonna have to talk, because we
Correct.
care about you. We care about more than
Mm.
just what you're doing. Something that simple um, could be so helpful. How often did you just get to spend time in those years that you remember? How often did you just get to spend time with a pastor or church staff, talking life with them, listening and asking questions, and
Mm.
ministry not having any involvement?
Actually, a lot.
Good,
There are
good.
countless free in and out lunches or Chipotle or Starbucks runs, and I definitely look forward. I definitely look forward to those. I loved and cherished every single one of those. There's probably like 2 or 3 times a week I was going out to lunch with a pastor and with some friends with the pastor,
Very cool.
and I felt loved in those situations. I felt seen, um, and I felt cherish. I felt like, hey, I'm going to keep coming back because I get free in and out. And this is like, it's super awesome. That's my favorite meal ever. And so, um, yeah, I definitely did get a lot of that.
Mm,
But again, it wasn't, the conversations were really like, hey, we're going to go through a Bible study. We're going to go through a devotional. We're going to, I remember one pastor, we went through a series where it was like 40 answers for like skeptics or something. Those apologetics books. And so it was like, hey, every week we're going to talk about like how to debunk like Mormonism, and that's what the conversations were typically about.
yeah.
Some of it was just like goofing around because we're high school boys or whatever, and
Yeah.
but when it came down to it, I wasn't really asked like, why are you here? Like, yeah, it was just like, hey, uh, I'm a youth pastor, so all these kids really love me. Like, we seem to have a good time. We love getting food, and so we're just going to talk about like Bible stuff all the time, which was super fun. And I definitely enjoyed those moments. But again, it's like I said, there wasn't enough slow down. There wasn't, and I think even then it was like, again, your youth pastor is 20 years old. Your youth pastor is also in a stage of life where they're trying to figure out what they want to be, what their career trajectory is in ministry. They're only making like enough money to barely survive, and so I'm sure they have the stresses as well. And I've talked to a youth pastor that I had before, and he told me how much money he was making when I was in sixth grade, and I was like, dang, like you could not survive on that. The only way he survived was because the church owned a house, and so he was able to kind of pay rent that way because it was like split up amongst like 10 other pastors. Um, and yeah, he looked forward to those meals as well because that was a way for him to get that extra like nutrition in out, not out of his paycheck, but out of the church's pocketbook. And so I think, yeah, nowadays, when I go to a church, like I said, with the recent church experience I've had, is I'm like, there are so many more resources now.
Yeah.
The information gap is so much smaller now, to where I'm like, any church now does not have that excuse of, well, we didn't know. We didn't
Yeah.
know, like, we didn't have the vocabulary. We didn't know that mental health
Mm,
was as such a big of an issue that you can't just continuously like spiritually bypass people. But
yeah.
nowadays, I'm like, there's this conversation, there's this platform, your podcast, or countless other podcasts, or it's constantly on social media. People are constantly
Yeah.
talking about and sharing their stories to where I'm like, there's no excuse now, to where you just didn't know. Like, you can't get
Yeah.
away with, I didn't know. There are
Hmm.
resources, countless resources, that are scientifically backed mental health, and then also like backed spiritually as well from a spiritual
Yeah.
foundation that, there's just no excuse now to where we're not asking kids like, hey, how's your life at home? Do you feel safe? Do you have the
Yeah.
resources you need for success? And that just even goes beyond students as well, but just like any adult
Yeah.
volunteer.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of those things too, man. Like being in this space,
Mhm.
it's easy for people in the church, and I get that as somebody in the church, but it's easy for
Mhm.
people in the church to say, "Hey, why are podcasts like this
Yeah,
attacking the church? Why are you negative? Why don't you talk about the good things?" And
yeah,
the reason why we have these conversations is because we love the church so much. It's because
Mhm.
we want to give those resources. We want to bring those conversations out so that pastors can learn. Because just like men, you know, I am learning, from my mistakes. I'm learning,
yeah,
hey, pastors could do this differently just in this conversation. But a lot of times it doesn't get received that way because we feel like people are attacking our identity. They're
Mm.
attacking the system, something like that. Um, but it sounds like a lot of those conversations, like you love the lunches, you love the conversations, those were great. But it always felt like there had to be an agenda,
yeah,
right? So it wasn't like people pouring into you personally or asking you questions personally. So again, it was, hey, I'm a part of the system and the agenda of the system, or I'm doing work, and that's what I'm doing. Now, it makes more sense hearing about, your pastor and how little he was making. He probably felt like, you know, hey, I've got to have an agenda. I've got to have a reason why the church is paying for this lunch,
Yeah.
because I want to take these kids out to lunch, but I also can't afford groceries if I'm not getting a few of
Yeah.
these lunches and stuff like that. But I think that's a whole nother side we don't talk about, you
Mm.
know, and in churches today, this still happens. There is such an income disparity, Nick, that I have found between in your larger churches. So I'm going to say 400 and above. 400 and
Okay.
above are your top 9% of churches in the country. Okay. But that's where 50% of all churchgoers go. So half of the Christians in the country are going to churches 400 and above. If you're at a church of 400 and above, there is often a massive income discrepancy between like the lead pastor or the executive pastor, kind of those top level executive level pastors, and the ones at the bottom, right? So
Definitely.
your secretaries, your bottom end staff members, your student pastors. I was a student pastor for a long time, and I can resonate and I can empathize with your student pastor. There were times where the
Mhm.
money I was making, it was, how in the world is a family of four supposed to make it on this money, right? So
Yeah.
it's not just volunteer exploitation that becomes the issue. I think that sometimes the reason why volunteers get used and exploited is because they're being led by staff members who are being used and exploited, right?
Definitely.
And it's one thing if you don't have the money to pay that pastor, but if you have the money and you're paying other pastors very high salaries and you're not taking some of that out to make a livable wage for those on the bottom, well, if the staff members are struggling, then they're going to use people to get things done, and it's going to be easier for them to hurt people on accident, right? So it's kind of a trickle down effect. If
Mm.
you're being exploited, it's going to be easy for you to exploit someone because all you're trying to do is survive. So I have so much empathy for your youth pastor in that moment, because a lot of what was happening to you, things were getting overlooked because he wasn't given the resources that he needed. So I think it's important, if we're going to hire staff members in churches, when we hire you, we may not be able to pay you the wage we want, but we need to make sure that we're going to be able to pay you a livable wage. And if we can't pay you a livable wage, we're just not ready to hire you yet. You
Yeah.
know, what do you think? Do you see that playing a role? Like, as you said, you've had these conversations with a lot of your pastors and church leaders from those
Mm.
days. Is that something that comes up a lot? Is that their lack of resources, lack of knowledge, lack of income? Does that seem to play a role in them not seeing some of the things that they could have seen in you, or in some of those kind of exploitative practices?
Definitely. Definitely. I think a lot of the pastors I've had could definitely look back on that time and they definitely resonate with, hey, we didn't have the resources. They didn't know how to ask questions. They didn't know how to engage in tough conversations, really, unless someone like explicitly told them, hey, I'm being abused, or I feel like I'm being used or exploited. So unless someone like explicitly told them, there was no way they were going to find out. And I think a lot of people who have been abused or who have like volunteered so much just out of survival, of whether that's just like, hey, I need to survive in this church environment because I need to conform and be a certain way because my faith depends on it.
Mm-hmm.
Then yeah, there's a lot of masking that happens.
Mm.
I did not, I know for me in my experience, I did not want anybody to know about the abuse I was having at home
Yeah.
because it's just covered in so much shame. It's ugly, it's messy, and then a part of me was
Yeah.
also like, this is normal because that's all I knew,
It was normal for
and
you.
it was normal for me. Yeah, that's all I knew. That was the only experience I knew. I knew it was a generational trauma that kept happening in my family, and so I was like, oh, yeah, this is normal. Like, this, every family must be like doing the same thing.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I didn't speak up. I didn't want my pastors to know because it's again tied to identity. And so, if
Yeah.
I come out and say, hey, I'm being abused, then what will my life then look like? Will I still be able to come here to this church? Is it still going to be a safe space? Will my
Mm-hmm.
friends and my peers who I'm also volunteering alongside of still kind of like welcome me in? And so I think it's all tied up. It's all messy. And
Mm.
so I think that's where resources come into play. And so it's like you said, it's that trickle down effect. So if you're
Yeah.
a senior pastor, your executive pastor is making 10 times more than your student pastor, then like the student pastor has no resources then to send someone to a therapy, like, or maybe that youth pastor isn't even in therapy themselves because they can't afford it. And so they don't know the benefits of it, so they can't like say, hey, well, I've gone to therapy. So I think maybe you should as a student, or
Yeah.
it's just always like, hey, we're just going to pray about it. Because that's
Yeah.
all we're taught to do. Like, we're just going to pray about it. We're going to fast. We're going to do all these spiritual things in hopes that your situation gets better. When,
Mm.
yeah, prayer works. Like, I believe in prayer. I believe in the power of prayer. But not it's not all the time. Sometimes you need more resources. I think I always think about the story of, there's this guy on an island stranded in the middle of nowhere, and he's just like praying to God that someone will come rescue him. And then a cruise ship comes up. And then he's like,
Yeah.
"No, I don't need the cruise ship. Like, I'm praying God's going to save me." It's like, yo, the resource is right there.
Yeah.
God sent this cruise ship. God sent, like, there's therapy. There are these resources like books and curriculums and classes that we can get that we can use. And so, yeah, so it's just
Yeah.
like all culture. It's all the culture of the church in terms of like not having the resources, and then not wanting to spend the money. And then, like you said, the agenda of when I was going out to lunch, it's like, hey, well, if we're going to pay for this youth pastor to go get lunch with these kids, then it needs to be biblically driven, or they need to be doing it for a discipleship reason,
Yeah.
rather than, hey, they're just getting lunch to, just have a nice meal.
Hey, Disruptors, I want to tell you about my friend Dustin Stepp and the East Tennessee Mentorship Association and how they can help you heal from religious trauma, spiritual abuse, or just become the best version of you. East Tennessee Mentorship Association is a veteran-owned mental health support and personal development organization that acknowledges the importance of your deeply held beliefs as a factor in their overall well-being. Through one-on-one mentorship sessions, culturally neutral small groups, workshops, outdoor activities, and more, they can contribute to your journey, offering battle-tested perspectives to help you move past your obstacles and toward your potential. If you want to change your life and you're ready to do your part of the work in a supportive environment, then call East Tennessee Mentorship Association today at 865-282-4403. That's 865-282-4403. Go ahead, give them a call, and tell them Church Disrupted sent you for a special rate. I'm telling you now, you won't regret it. And thank you to East Tennessee Mentorship Association for your support of the Church Disrupted podcast. Well, and there's so many of those things where we get it twisted from Scripture itself because we read Scripture with such a Western mindset. Like, I'm thinking, how many times when we don't have resources, we say, well, we'll do all we know how to do. The spiritual thing is to say, pray and fast.
Yeah.
That's the opposite of what God told Elijah to do when he was suicidal. He'd taken on the prophets of Baal. He's running from Jezebel. He ends up in the cave and he says, I wish I could just die. Right. And what does God tell him to do? He says, hey, eat a snack, take a nap. Eat a snack, take a nap. That's the opposite of praying and fasting. It's resting and eating. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. My wife is a therapist and of course also a Christian. She's done, science-backed therapy. She's done that in churches. She does that private practice now. But she tells people that all the time. She says, sometimes the best thing you can do when you are struggling is to give yourself permission to have a snack and a nap. Yeah. That is okay. It's not bad. Yet we miss that from Scripture. We miss that it doesn't have to always be prayer and fasting. Sometimes it needs to be In-N-Out Burger and a game of dodgeball because that's okay. Like with no point, no biblical point, like we just need to be. So yeah, I think that's important. Also, you mentioned about therapy and pastors not being able to afford therapy. We're in the really early stages of this. I don't know when this airs, if we're going to have the if we're going to have the nonprofit up and running yet, where the budget's going to be. But we are going beyond just this podcast. We're actually starting a nonprofit to house the podcast and everything else we're going to do, called the Spiritual Abuse Institute. So we're sending in all the final paperwork and stuff right now, already set up in Tennessee. But one of the things that we want to be able to do, and you may need this, or you may also be listening and say, hey, I would like to donate toward that. I'd like to be a part of that. We want to be able to get to the point where we have a fund that if there's a pastor that says, hey, I'm not healthy, and I know that's going to hurt people, so I want to make sure I'm healthy, I need to go to therapy. Because Jeff, you guys talk about going to therapy all the time. We recommend that every pastor goes to therapy. We want to get a fund together to where when a pastor says, I'm not healthy and I need that therapy, but I can't afford it and my church can't afford it, that we can help them find a therapist and subsidize that therapy, at least for a couple of sessions, so that they can get healthy, so that they have somewhere to go. Because I think that's huge, man. And I think when pastors don't have a place to go to get healthy, they don't have a place to go talk, they're not going to serve people well. They're not going to pastor people well. So a lot of times what ends up becoming spiritual abuse, I have empathy for it. I've done this myself. It's when we're unhealthy and feel isolated and alone, we tend to project all those things on other people. So one of the best things that we can do to combat spiritual abuse is actually to take care of our pastors. That doesn't mean lavish salaries and stuff like that, but making sure they can get in therapy, making sure they have the resources and education that they need to do the job, making sure they're paid a livable wage. Some really simple stuff that I think most people assume that is often not the case in churches, just as I've looked at it. Another thing though, that you talked about is, you said, I didn't want to talk about my abuse. I didn't want to talk about stuff going at home. There was shame, there was guilt. It was, parts of it were normal to me. There's all this going on. And it reminds me, Nick, that for most people, adults, kids, doesn't matter. Most parishioners are not going to tell us as pastors what's going on. They're not going to. One thing that I hear from pastors a lot in spiritually abusive situations, when someone does bring up an allegation, they say, this hurt me, right? They'll say, well, they never told me. And they get defensive. Though they never told me, I can't be responsible for that. They never said anything. Well, a lot of times they're not going to say anything because the guilt, the shame, all of that stuff that's involved, they don't want to lose their community. They don't want to rock the boat. So on one hand, what I heard from you is we have to ask. We have to ask deeper questions. We have to ask probing questions. We have to care enough to look past what the person is saying and ask some deeper questions that give them permission to safely talk about those things. One of the things I used to ask some of my staff members, that I learned from other leaders at conferences and stuff like that, but I used to ask the people on my team, what's it like to be on the other side of me? How am I leading you well? How am I not? You have permission to tell me, right? And I think that's helpful when we ask, but also knowing that people may bring things up when they get to a boiling point, right? And we can't get mad at them. If we get defensive because they never told us, we're missing the point. If we'll just receive it and say, I am so sorry, tell me more. How can I make this right? How can I be better in the future? If we can do that instead of getting defensive, it will disarm people and it will help us get better and learn and stop the cycle of abuse. But I think it's important to say that a lot of times why people haven't told you, there's a reason they haven't told you. And it may not be your fault, but when we're trauma informed as church staffs, which is another thing the Spiritual Abuse Institute is going to do, we're going to do trauma training with church staff so they can be trauma informed. Because from a trauma informed perspective, well, I know exactly what you didn't tell me because you didn't feel like it was safe to tell me. So what can I do to make sure that it feels safe in the future, to do that? So really, really powerful stuff that I just wanted to piggyback on. Is there anything that I missed on that idea of like people not wanting to tell or having to be asked that you want to make sure the listeners hear that I missed?
Yeah. I think having pastors be trauma informed is super helpful. I think that will definitely do a lot for a lot of people. And yeah, because like I said, I didn't want people to know I was being abused because I needed to self-preserve and protect myself in any way, shape, or form. And so so later on in life, when I was serving and I went to go work at a summer camp, and again, all this trauma is boiling within me and it's ready to make its way out. I caught myself in unhealthy cycles of stealing. That's how it was starting to bubble up and come out of me. And I ultimately was serving at a summer camp all summer. Summer camp ended early, and I went to go live with some staff members because I was just trying to figure out my life. And I ultimately stole some money from these people I served alongside of, and then that just resulted in them, rightfully so, wanting to kind of cut ties with me because they felt like, hey, Nick is unsafe. He's stealing money from us, and it's like, yeah, I totally get like you're gonna cut that ties from me. But for me in that moment, I just felt abandoned. No one knew to ask, hey, why are you stealing this money? Like, what what is causing you to act out in this way? And
Mm.
I just had to keep moving forward. And then
Yeah.
again, a couple years later, I was engaged to my now wife, and again, still undealt trauma within inside of me. I again caught in that same cycle of, okay, now I'm stealing from the neighbor, and then I'm getting in trouble
Yeah.
there. And again,
Mm-hmm.
no one's asking me like, why did you do this? Like, oh my gosh, Nick is such a bad person. Like, what else has he done? And putting me into whatever narrative they can. And again, people
Mm-hmm.
within the church, people I served alongside of, pastors, just like coming to conclusions about why is Nick acting out, um, and
Mm-hmm.
putting in their own answer, um, rather
Yeah.
than asking me. So I'm now on the defense, not ready to say, here's what here's the big dark secret of why I'm doing this.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until like many years later when I then felt safe with my wife did I break down and I was like, I was sexually abused by my brother.
Mm.
And so then then the dominoes started to kind of fall into place. So I was like, oh, this is why he spent so much time in church serving, because it was safe
Mm.
there. This is
Yeah.
why when summer camp ends early and he's in a financial crisis because his job just ended earlier than he thought, and he doesn't know where to go, this is why he's stealing money, because he feels powerless. He
Mm.
doesn't feel like anybody is looking out for him. And
Yeah.
all goes back to like, oh, the abuse I had. And then even just like my identity being wrapped up so much so with faith and then my works and then
Mm.
volunteering and then compounding on top of each other. And it's just like, oh, this is so messy. And again, it just continued to boil
Yeah.
and boil and boil and boil and boil. And then, yeah, ultimately, until I broke down, when I was in a safe space with my wife, did I
Mm.
break down and say I was abused? And then so began the journey of deconstructing my own faith, of saying, um, hey, I was abandoned. Like, these people I volunteered with abandoned me when they found out I stole something, and now this act of I stole something again. Now I'm coming out as like abuse survivor. Am I now like, again, identity and shame? It's messy. It's
Mm-hmm.
ugly. Is the church going to abandon me now, like they did then?
Mm.
And so self preservation of, I'm going to stop going to church, because the church right now to me is so unhealthy. It is not a safe space for me to go, because they're going to continuously push their narrative onto mine. And that I don't feel safe. I don't feel heard. I don't feel like someone can understand me. And it wasn't until many years later, after not going to church and going through COVID and going through all the social unrest in our country and coming up with all these other reasons and logically saying, oh yeah, I'm not going to go to church because XYZ,
Yeah.
and continuously like talking myself out of it. But then I, through graphic design, I was brought in to work on a project for an old youth pastor of mine who was going into life coaching and doing some
Mm.
therapy stuff. And was I able to then work on his logo and his website and get him like his social media restarted and everything, and opening the conversation there again of like therapy and
Very cool.
safe spaces and pain cycles and peace cycles and God's hand in all of
Yeah.
this, and talking about all this therapy stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
then I was opened up to like, oh, there are safe spaces. Now I'm going to actually like process this trauma. I'm going to learn about all these things that have happened to me and reflect on them, and have all these pieces around me that have been flying around be put together. And so that's ultimately how I ended up going back into church. And like I said, we found a church that was willing to continually like ask us questions, not from a way of like,
Mm,
hey, we just need to do this so this guy can continue to come each week, but
yeah,
out of a way of like, hey, these are like friendships and from pastors and leaders and
sure.
other volunteers within our church that these people care and they genuinely
Mm,
care. The church was like 200 people, so it was really small.
mm,
So production level was super like low, stripped back, um, and it was just a way for me to then reset. How do I
yeah,
approach church? How do I approach Christianity? How do I grow in my faith again that I once walked away from?
yeah,
And it was all coming from understanding like you can't just continually spiritually bypass people, and you have to sit down and listen to them, and engage in these open conversations. You need to also be willing to like open up a part of yourself as well for the person to feel safe. So I was able to hear like all these other stories of like from these other pastors of here's like some mental health stuff I walked through. Here's a season of depression I walked through. Oh, I was abused as well. And so this is why I do certain things this way, or this is what I have learned. An open dialogue rather than the pastor going up every Sunday and portraying a perfect image of themselves, and just like continuously there. So I think a lot of churches now can have these open conversations, have these open dialogues, panel discussions of
yeah.
sitting down with people within their community and understanding where are they coming from rather than ultimately assuming what they need.
That's right.
And so I think especially now, it's like you said, it's Holy Week as we're recording.
Mm,
I've had a couple of people message me about how hard of a season this is for them because they just felt like every Easter service was a pageant. It was a beauty pageant for
yeah,
families to come in looking to look perfect, to look a certain way on sunrise service, and they've that's all they know is like they were never really shown like Jesus actually he loves you, he cares for you,
yeah,
he died for you, but not in a manipulative way. Like,
yeah.
and so I think it'll take a lot of time for churches to kind of get this right. But I think the best way to start it is just having conversations with people, have conversations with your volunteers, have conversations with people that don't volunteer. So yeah,
There's the conversations are powerful, but part of what makes a conversation is listening, right? One of the things that I invite people to on social media, on the Church Disrupted accounts all the time is
yeah,
conversation. But there's a lot of people who come in with attack and arguments, and all they want to do is
mhm,
attack personally.
yeah,
They want to argue. And I'll tell them, I would love to talk about this if you want a conversation. But if you just want to attack, correct, argue, those sort of things, that's not going to help us get anywhere. Right. And I think a lot of
mhm,
times in churches, and part of this is like the monologue approach of things like sermons, and classes and stuff like that can lead to this. But we miss the power of James 1:17, right? Be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. Well, if you're quick to listen, that gives the implication that you've asked questions, right?
yeah,
And one of the things I've heard from your story time and time again is just the power of asking questions. The power of a pastor asking a question, to that student or to that parishioner who's volunteering all the time. The power of you asking yourself questions. I
yeah,
remember probably about 5, 6 years ago now, I started asking questions about myself and some places where I wasn't in a bad place. I just wasn't as healthy as I needed to be. Ended
mm,
up going to therapy, literally saying that I don't know really what's wrong. I just know something is. Well, I found out, long story short, man, it's a lot like you going to therapy. It's a lot like you figuring out, oh, it was this abuse that caused this, right? Well, I didn't realize that I had PTSD, and I'd
mm,
had PTSD from things that had happened when I was 7, right? So from
yeah,
7 years old on, I'd been doing a lot of things. I didn't even know why I was doing them. But by asking questions of why am I not as healthy as I want to be? Why do I do these things? What would that PTSD cause? By asking those questions, it totally transformed my life as well. So there's a power in questions, whether you're a pastor who's listening and you're learning to ask better questions to the people who are serving in your teams, or whether you're just listening and going, man, I've never really asked some of those questions about myself. Or, that's why therapy is so helpful. It forces
Yeah.
us to ask those questions in a safe space where we can come to those answers. So a couple of other things that you said that I want to talk about before we finish. You brought up spiritual bypassing a couple of
Mm.
times.
Yeah.
Probably going to have a lot of our audience members that haven't heard that term. They're not familiar with what that is. So, would you mind just kind of breaking that down for them? What is spiritual bypassing, and why is it so dangerous if we don't notice it?
Yeah. For me, it was even now, as someone who's continuing to push my story out there, it's definitely, especially with abuse and sexual abuse within um, my family, is the idea of, oh, well, I need to forgive my brother because of Jesus. Because Jesus he died for him. And I was like, okay, yeah, I definitely now come to a point where I'm like, okay, I do forgive my brother. I do forgive my abuser. I do forgive other people who have hurt me, because ultimately that is what Jesus said. Um, but I think when you just end there, and it's like, okay, well, now you need to accept him into the fold. I need to now go to barbecues with,
Forgiveness doesn't mean restoring that relationship.
yeah. And then, but then I'm told, well, Jesus, like, he forgave people, and then he like lets them into heaven, and then he has relationships with them. It's like, well, I'm not Jesus. So I think that for me is a form of spiritual bypassing I still face day to day, is like, oh, I just need to forgive people because Jesus did. Or I just need to like pray. I'm feeling depressed, so I need to just pray about it. I'm feeling anxious, but Jesus says, like, don't be anxious for anything. It's like, just continuously like saying all these other things to kind of go around the actual problem is spiritual bypassing. It is saying, well, you need to do this because the Bible said so, or because Jesus said so. And again, it's that same idea of like, there's this guy on the island. He's waiting to be saved, and he's praying about it. He's praying, praying, praying about it. And the cruise ship comes up. It's like, no, I need to continue to pray about it, because this is what like my pastor told me to do. And just like, there are all these other resources that you can do. So it's like, yeah, I feel anxious. I feel depressed. I feel alone. I feel sad. I feel something is wrong within me, but I don't know what it is. Yeah, I can pray about it. But I also know, like, there are resources around me, like therapy, that can help me get out of this funk. It can help me put the pieces back together, more than just praying about it. Like, yeah, you can pray about it, but you can also need to like do something on your own accord and like go out there and actually get help, rather than just hunkering down at home, fasting for forever. And it's like you said with Elijah, it's like, yeah, you gotta take a nap, you gotta eat, you gotta take care of yourself. Like, it's not just like fasting and praying all the time. So spiritual bypassing for me is it's the idea of, I'm just gonna pray through it. I'm just gonna forgive because Jesus forgave. But the reality I know within my situation is, I'm gonna forgive my brother for the abuse, because one, we were kids. There probably was a point where he didn't know what he was doing, but it did happen for a long time. So there did become a point where he did know. And so it's like, yeah, I forgive him, but he's not safe. He's not safe for me to be around. I don't feel safe with him. So I'm going to set that boundary rather than just forgiving and forgetting. But I'm going to protect myself and protect my family, protect my kids, protect the people around me from him, because he's not safe. And I even know, like, with my parents now, it's like they're in that boat of, we're just going to forgive him because this is what Jesus said to do, but we're also going to forget about it. And they're just going to not hold him accountable. And so it's like, no, that's not for me. That's just continually like going around the problem. That's not like sending anybody to therapy, getting them actual help, and holding like unsafe spaces accountable. And so I think that's even what we're doing with this podcast with churches as well. It's like, hey, we're going to say like, yeah, we can pray that the church will get better. We can pray for more resources, but unless we like actually use those resources, unless we actually get our pastors into therapy, unless we actually slow down and like have action, to solve things and listen to people and create safe spaces for them, then nothing's going to change.
Yeah.
So instead of just like praying about it and praying that Jesus will like restore the church, we got to do something ourselves.
Yeah, well, because I think about that in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, spiritual bypassing is using faith or
Yeah.
spiritual things as an excuse to not take action.
Yeah,
In the scripture,
definitely.
it talks about we need faith and action. We need
Yeah.
faith and works. But that was exactly, man. As you were talking, I was thinking about it with this podcast. People get upset with us and often ask us to spiritually bypass. Hey, don't talk about abuse. Don't talk about the nasty stuff because that causes division, because that, that's hurting the church. Why don't you just share the gospel instead? Well, I will share the gospel. We're also going to talk about systemic things that are leading to the hurt and the abuse of people because people matter, right? And I can't share the gospel, care about the gospel, and not care about people who the gospel is for being affected by spiritual abuse, by toxic systems, by church hurt that we can avoid. It doesn't always have to be abuse. Sometimes it's just church hurt that we can easily avoid. I know we're running low on time, but one of the things that you talked about earlier was you talked about the idea of the in crowd, being involved in the in crowd or not being involved in the in crowd, and the anxiety that started. And I think about this whole idea. We posted a clip a couple of weeks ago, and it was about Dream Team. Because a lot of churches have dream teams as part of the growth track system. We're going to call our volunteers dream teams. And we posted the clip to simply say, when you use language like we've got a dream team, it creates a false dichotomy. It creates a dichotomy of you're either on the dream team or you're not. Your identity's better if you're on the dream team versus if you're not. And people got really upset about it. People got really upset about it because they said, hey, this is a way to try to celebrate our volunteers. This is a way to try to say nice things. The intent is not to create that dichotomy. And one of the conversations we kept having over and over, Nick, was it may not be the intent, but it is the result, right?
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, that seemed like such a small thing. Jeff, why are you guys talking about something as small as Dream Team? We had people saying that, we're running out of content or we're nitpicking. Well, the reason why we were talking about it, Nick, is because it created that in-crowd versus out-crowd mentality. Right.
Yeah.
And I know there are a lot of people, if you've been through spiritual abuse, religious trauma, you come into a church, serving is going to be one of the last things you do because usually there's religious trauma attached to that. So, I had to go to the church we're going to now. I had to go for like 9 months before I was ready to serve, So when they hear language like the dream team or the winning team or things like that, if you serve, you're on the dream team, you're on the winning team. And if you're not, you're not. That can actually bubble up more of that trauma. So it's another one of those examples. And I wanted to hit it because I just thought it was so important from what you said about the in crowd. How do you see that though? Because, I know you even commented, I think on that post as well. Like some of those things they're done with such good intentions. They're not meant to hurt anybody. How do we deal with them though, when we realize, oh, some people are carrying trauma into this and this does hurt them, but it doesn't have to. So what do we do with those seemingly small things when we realize they're causing trauma?
Man, I was just like, man, the people that respond that are so defensive about it, of like, well, we're here to celebrate the volunteers. Like, yeah, I think it's like celebrating your volunteers is like huge. I think taking them out to lunch is huge. I think doing luncheons or whatever, like taking them out bowling or whatever, it's like that's super cool. Like you should definitely celebrate your volunteers. But yeah, when you label them dream team, and then you on Sunday morning in front of like hundreds of people, and the dream team is like 50, and you're in front of the whole congregation, it is that in crowd. It is like, oh man, there's only 50 of them. Am I ever going to be able to make the cut? Right? Like what draft pick am I? Like, are you going to pick me? And it's just like, yeah, then you just feel like the kid that's just like last picked for dodgeball. You're back like first grade, you know? And so,
Nobody wants to be picked last on the playground, but we especially don't want to be picked last spiritually. We don't want to be the
definitely.
leftovers in the church. So you join that dream team, you serve, you start doing all these things because you want to feel like you matter.
Yeah. Yeah, you want to feel like you matter. You want to feel seen. You want to feel heard. You're sticking out in a group of like 400, 500 people any given
Mhm.
weekend. It's tough. And it's like, okay, well, now the pastor, I want to just, it's the idea of like, I just want to touch the hem of Jesus, you know? I just want to
Mhm.
like I want to get close to this pastor. Or I just want to like shake his hand and, or, you know, just because I want to be blessed. I want
Mhm.
to feel like secure in my salvation because I was recognized by um, Pastor so and so. I've looked
Mhm.
up to this man or this woman for years, and now they see me, and now I get to volunteer with them, and that's just extra time with so and so, and that just like makes my heart feel so happy and so
Yeah.
secure in my faith. And so my dream team, yeah, that's it's definitely hard because yeah, you want to volunteer. I mean, you want to celebrate your volunteers, but sometimes yeah, you want people to feel included. So I think I would just not like name your team, you know, it's like our
Yeah.
volunteers, like
What's the
rather
harm in
than
calling them what they are, volunteers?
yeah, like they're volunteers. They're, you know, Joe and Sally down the street, or like there are greeters, you know, like not like this is our dream team. Like you can call like your mission trip team the dream team if you want to. Like but like that's totally different context. That's just like people going out overseas for like a week. It's like, oh, that was our
Mhm.
dream team. Like, oh yeah, that's
Yeah.
cool. Because everybody could have joined that team if they wanted to. Like if they wanted to
Mhm.
volunteer for that, they could have done
Yeah.
that. Like if they just had the funds, they could do it. But yeah, when you're like, oh, the worship team, the in crowd, you know, and then you see it and you're looking. We just moved recently, and so we've been church shopping for a little bit. And so we went to one church and it was just like you were looking at this team of people and you're like, wait, that person is related to that pastor, and then that's the wife of that guy, and then you're like, oh, it's just they're
Mhm.
all this. It's all just one family, you know, just one giant family,
Yeah.
and they're the dream team. And I was like, oh, well, I don't want to be here because like I'm never going to be able to aspire to that. Like, because
Yeah.
I'm not in that in crowd. I don't know somebody. I can't just be like, I want to. They're going to stick me on parking lot duty, you know.
Yep.
And that's not where I want to. That's not where I want to be. And so yeah, then you feel like
Yeah.
then there's that food chain mentality of oh, if I'm on stage as a pianist and I'm like level 10, and then if I'm in the parking lot, I'm like level 100. Like I got so many ways to go. So yeah, I think, but responding in the comments saying being offended by it is not the proper like response. I think the proper response is just having open dialogue and seeing, oh, I can see
Yeah.
how this hurts someone. I can see how like someone might feel spiritually abused by it. I can see how it might trigger people. I can see how it might turn people away rather than continuously defending it. So these open conversations, I think, are the way to go with any kind of topic
Mhm.
of that might cause some friction. I think we need to embrace that friction and go towards it because I think there's a lot of
For
people
sure.
they have a lot of just different experiences and they have a lot of different contexts is what I like to say is people come from everybody came from somewhere and everybody is going somewhere and we're all just
Yeah.
on this journey of transformation together and so with that mentality it's again unity over uniformity like let's just unite together. Can we all just like come to church together and maybe we all don't believe the same things, maybe we don't um, agree on all the same topics, politically, religion, or anything like that, but be open to the idea of people are just on this journey of transformation. And maybe the person
Mhm.
that is offended by the idea of Dream Team, they just came down the street from you. Maybe that's you in 10 years. If you're, or if you're like on this side of the conversation saying, how could somebody be so offended by Dream Team? or, be offended that we're calling them out,
Yeah.
then maybe that was me. I was that guy in the comment 10 years ago.
Yeah, so
I
was
was
I.
that guy.
So was
Yeah.
I.
And so I think it's like giving people the benefit of the doubt is definitely a way to go.
Hey Disruptors, have you heard about the Church Disrupted community? It's an online community for Church Disrupted listeners where you can ask questions, you can connect and talk with other like-minded people who've experienced church hurt and spiritual abuse, and you can ask honest and vulnerable questions without judgment of any kind. And that's without the trolls, the anger, and the constant arguments that tend to come with social media. And the best part is it's 100% free because of our gracious and generous donors. So, if you've experienced church hurt, spiritual abuse, or religious trauma of any kind, and you're on the healing journey, I want to invite you to join me in the Church Disrupted community. You can join at disrupted.church or spiritualabuse.institute. And we're also including a link below where you can join just through the description. So, what are you waiting for? Join the Church Disrupted community for free today. We can't wait to meet you. Very good, man. Well, Nick, thank you so much. I've loved this conversation. This has been super helpful. I think helpful for the pastors that are listening. Got a lot of church leaders who listen.
Yeah.
But very helpful for people who have just been through a lot of what you've been through. Because the majority of our audience, man, they're dealing with their own religious trauma. They're dealing with spiritual abuse, or they know someone who has. So thank you for taking the time with us today. Thank you for being so vulnerable. Like, you've shared some really hard parts of your story. And I think, one of the greatest things that you could ever share with somebody is your vulnerability. So thank you for giving us that gift today. And before we go, man, let people know how can they connect with the Collision podcast, and how can they, follow for more of your work?
Yeah, find me on Instagram at Collision Podcast. On TikTok, not sure if they're going to ban that or not, but at Collision Podcast there. And then collisionpodcast.org is my website. And if you have a story of deconstruction, spiritual abuse, any topics of that nature, even if you think your story is insignificant, everybody has a story and you're not alone in that. I think there's a lot of people that have come on. They're like, I didn't know what to share. I didn't know I had a story. And then comes out like people are reaching out to them saying, oh my gosh, I related to that so much. It's like, even if you think your story is so insignificant, it's not. Your story, even if you felt like you had to be silenced your entire life, like you don't need to be silenced anymore. Collision is definitely a safe space. I definitely, as a host, am just like trying to be open to people and just continue to ask them questions when they come on and share their story. It's just like, not from a way of, hey, you need to defend all your reasonings for doing what you did or the experiences you had. It's just like, no, like this, it's a safe space for anybody. And like I said, it's a podcast that's just a mirror for you. So even if you don't want to share, definitely a lot of varying perspectives on the podcast, people that have continued to go to church and people that just don't want anything to do with it. There's a lot to learn from both sides. I think if you're going to want people to listen to you, you need to do the same and listen to them as well.
Sure.
So
and that's what I love, man. You guys have great conversations. You have people who fully deconstructed, left the faith. You have a lot of people who just deconstructed part of their tradition, still love Jesus and are, a part of the church. But I love it just even as you, man, you're someone who's still in the church, still practicing your faith. Yet you say, I needed to deconstruct some things, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's power even for people who are fully deconstructing of just saying, you know what, I trust God to go after people. Like, I trust God to reveal himself to people. And sometimes the best thing that I can do is be that listening ear and show them a little bit of Jesus where they're at. So I've loved just kind of the diversity. I've listened to a few of the podcasts and the diversity of the conversation. So thank you for the work that you're doing, man. Thank you for coming on and being with us today. And guys, I hope as you listened, I hope that no matter who you are, where you're at, what your background is, that you were able to take something from this conversation today that encouraged you and something that you can learn from it. I know I was encouraged by a lot. I learned a lot. I think this got me asking different questions. So hopefully that's the same case for you. But guys, as always, until next time, grace and peace. And I'll see you on the next episode of Church Disrupted.